Some of the most expensive things in the world may surprise you. From million-dollar crash test dummies, to taxidermy in Texas, to the artist at the center of the NFT craze.
We sort of value things. It's like if everybody wants it, well then it has value.
We tell you how much it will cost to bring a tiny sample of dirt back from Mars, and go inside the most exclusive nanny school in the world, as we explore how these things became so expensive.
These are among the most exclusive and highly trained nannies in the world.
Ready, here we go.
They learn self-defense and advanced driving techniques. And even their cooking skills are a cut above.
We're sort of training a league of super nannies.
Think Mary Poppins with a little James Bond. The course at Norland College in England cost them $21,000 a year. But after graduation, they can command salaries of $170,000. That's 4 times the average nanny salary in the UK. Britain's royal family has even hired them. So, what does it take to become one of the most exclusive nannies in the world? Trained to protect themselves and the children in their care, Norland nannies are part of an elite. Often working for high-profile employers, they're expected to deal with potential threats, like kidnap attempts.
Unfortunately, I have had an experience where a man tried to take the little girl that I used to look after. I said, "You need to give her back," and he said, "No," and so I just had to pull her off of him whilst holding onto the buggy where her baby brother was. It is scary, but that's why I think parents hire Norlanders, because we are given that extensive training for these worst case scenarios, because actually the big wide world is very scary and you are looking after their most prized possession.
No. Shaking, your hands are shaking.
Got the adrenaline going.
In the career they've chosen,
No!
a lot of them don't realise what they're capable of, but after getting them into this, they really do come out of themselves.
It takes 4 years to become a fully qualified Norland nanny. 3 years of study, followed by a year's placements with a family. And it's more expensive than studying at Oxford or Cambridge University. But the idea is that their qualification will soon start paying off.
Within a year, they're actually averaging about $40,000 a year. So that's a young person in their early 20s, probably earning more money than perhaps an up-and-coming accountant or lawyer.
With the nannies earning that kind of money, skills like cooking and sewing have to be at the highest level.
When I was on my residential placement, the family had such a varied diet. They were really into like satay chicken, and we had lemongrass chicken a lot, so a lot of like, Pan-Asian flavours, and it was really nice to see.
So you place your nori with the shiny side down.
These third-year students are learning how to make child-friendly sushi.
And then you're using the bamboo mat to roll your sushi up.
I really don't enjoy cooking, to be honest, and so the lessons have been really, really helpful for myself, as I am not a confident cook.
The students do 3 years of sewing with us alongside their BA, and they work through a series of 6 projects developing their machine and hand sewing skills.
Yes, of course.
It could be just doing name labels and buttons are things that, you know, a family or all families need, but going on to making things that for their charges. Their children might have ideas and they'll make things with them or for them.
Is it an undoable knot?
I hope so. Bouncy, but this carriage pram would take a child up to about 2.5 years of age. So do we remember what this is called?
That's the apron.
The apron, absolutely, and you don't use that when you're inside because it could make the baby too hot.
The students also learn how to prepare an old-fashioned pram.
Remember, with carriage prams you don't have to do hospital corners, but you just want to make it as tidy and neat as you possibly can in the pram.
Norland nannies still use these today, in college and in the workplace.
Remember, attention to detail is really important, so make that look neat and tidy.
But Principal Dr. Janet Rose wants to modernise the image both of the college and of the nannying profession. Knowing how to control a car in skid is just one of the skills a modern-day Norland nanny can offer clients. Norland College was founded by Emily Ward nearly 130 years ago. Her aim was to encourage a better and more educated class of women to enter the ranks of domestic service.
So here we have the very first probationists, all the way back in 1892, the very first students at Norland. And here we have a photograph of one of our Norlanders who worked for the Greek royal family.
Back then, nannies had to wear nurses' uniforms to differentiate themselves from the household servants. Puffed sleeves and pinafores were replaced over time by a modest beige dress, brown bowler hat and brogues, and white cotton gloves. Nannies are still required to be immaculate and abide by strict rules. Smoking is banned, as is buying alcohol, fast food, or even a takeaway coffee.
I definitely found the uniform really appealing. I think there's something about wearing this uniform, you know, you represent 125 plus years of heritage, and this uniform means a lot. It means that we're highly trained and we're really passionate about doing what we do.
The college wants to attract more diverse, more international students. Norland is also taking on university status.
Soon we will become Norland University and will be the first specialist early years university in the world.
But for Freya, becoming a Norland nanny isn't about pay or prestige, it's about a passion for the job.
I want children to learn because they want to, I want them to explore because they want to, and be curious about the world. And for me, seeing that is the most rewarding thing ever. That's more rewarding than any paycheck I could ever get. Seeing a child exploring, being curious, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, that's just so incredible.
Which sounds, for parents who can afford it, practically perfect in every way.
This red dirt will be the most expensive substance known to mankind if we can bring it back from Mars. It will take 3 missions to collect and retrieve less than 1 kilogram, or a little over 2 pounds. One mission will examine and collect samples. It launched from Earth in July 2020. A second mission will gather the sample tubes and launch them into Mars orbit. A third mission will bring the samples back to Earth, and the total cost will top $9 billion. So, what makes samples of the dirt on Mars so important that NASA needs to bring them back? Will they help us finally answer the question of whether or not we are alone in the universe?
Heat shields up.
Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters off the surface of Mars.
The Perseverance rover landed on Mars on February 18th, 2021.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the signs of past life.
Percy, as the rover is nicknamed, arrived after years of meticulous planning and a 7-month voyage through 300 million miles of space. It's a feat, considering only 40% of missions to Mars have been successful.
And because it's all autonomous, it has to work the first time, or for baseball fans out there, space is a one strike and you're out business.
Percy will spend 2 years carrying out experiments and collecting samples of Martian rock. The mission costs NASA $2.7 billion. The rover is a mobile laboratory looking for signs of life and answers to some of mankind's biggest questions.
If there was life on Mars, exactly when? Was it 1 billion years ago? Was it 4 billion years ago? Did it predate or postdate life on Earth? You might want to know that because you might want to know, for example, where life originated first, and maybe it's even possible, some people have suggested, that life could have gone from one planet to another.
The rover is painstakingly searching for and identifying rocks in Jezero Crater, the site of an ancient Martian lake bed.
Even from space, we can see that there was a lake in this crater. That lake has not been present for billions of years. And so we need to reconstruct this history and to tell a history of the place.
NASA picked this lakebed because it offers the best chance of finding evidence of life.
It will be one of the greatest discoveries in human thought. I mean, forget just science.
Perseverance is the size of a small car, built to analyze the Martian surface with cameras, radar, X-rays, and spectrometers, then collect samples with drills and even lasers. But despite the cutting-edge technology, the instruments are nothing compared to the much larger and more capable instruments and labs found on Earth.
And to see microbes and fossils in rocks, one needs to cut rocks, to look through them, make thin slices, and then use those microscopes. And none of that is possible with the current rover technology.
A lot of the work before launch focused on guaranteeing that evidence of life gathered by Percy is, in fact, Martian life.
When we're sending spacecraft to Mars, we have to make sure that it's clean enough so that we don't contaminate the environment that we are trying to explore.
At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California, engineers and scientists cleaned and tested the spacecraft to levels far beyond the most sterile operating room.
We've taken over 16,000 samples of the spacecraft. We clean, we trust, but we always verify. And we're also extra paranoid about making sure it's clean. So that's why it turned into over 16,000 samples.
When Neil Armstrong returned with moon rocks, they were stored in triple-sealed aluminum boxes designed to protect their contents for about 10 days. For this mission to Mars, engineers designed a system to protect samples for up to 10 years. With more than 3,000 moving parts, NASA calls it the most intricate and technologically advanced system sent to space. There are 43 titanium tubes that hold a core sample about the size of a piece of chalk.
The tubes are the cleanest thing that we have built at JPL. It's ridiculously pristine.
There are clean rooms at JPL, and clean rooms within clean rooms. In a hyper-clean room, scientists blasted the tubes with air, used deionized water on them, and dipped them in baths of acetone and other chemicals to be ultrasonically cleaned. Then they were cooked.
All of those tubes went through 150-degree Celsius bakeout for 29 hours.
Each tube can only be filled once, so choosing samples is the job of an entire team, and the tools they use are some of the costliest parts of Perseverance. Tanya is on the team choosing those samples.
There's an instrument that can shoot laser beams at rocks and evaporate and make plasma, and then analyze that plasma to see what elements are present in rocks, which can tell us a lot about the rock composition.
But before Percy shoots space lasers, it has to see where it's going and where to aim. That's the most advanced of 23 onboard cameras and takes nearly every picture or video you will see from Mars for the next few years. Like everything else on Percy, it's built to withstand the extremes of Mars. Sample collection will finish in 2023. Almost a decade later, around 2031, the samples will be picked up from Mars and brought back to Earth. NASA and the European Space Agency are paying for the next two missions. The European share is $1.8 billion, while NASA's costs will likely be much higher. First, a fetch rover will be sent to the Martian surface.
Its only job will be to go out, grab the tubes, and bring them back.
The fetch rover will then transfer the collected tubes into a rocket that lands with it. Its purpose, another first, blasting off from another planet. Rocket fuel is explosive and heavy, so NASA is developing a way to make fuel on Mars. But Mars' atmosphere lacks oxygen, a component of rocket fuel. And that's where this gold square box being lowered into Percy comes in. MOXIE, or the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, converts the Mars atmosphere into oxygen. If it works, the second lander mission will carry a bigger MOXIE to create fuel.
So imagine that you have to build a rocket that will launch from Earth, travel 7 months, land on Mars, then when the samples are put into the nose cone, point to a certain place in the sky, and with 99.999% reliability, fire and then dock with a waiting spacecraft. Big, tall order.
That waiting spacecraft will launch from Earth at about the same time the Fetch rover does. Once it arrives, it'll grab the basketball-sized case containing samples.
And then that spacecraft, using electric propulsion, is going to turn around and fly back to Earth. And once it gets close, it will drop off the Earth entry vehicle. And the Earth entry vehicle is basically a heat shield with the samples inside. And that Earth entry vehicle will then land somewhere in Utah.
NASA's Independent Review Board projected the total Mars sample return mission at nearly $9 billion. But that only gets us to a landing in the desert, not studying the samples, which will likely push costs into the double-digit billions. The Apollo moon rocks came back to Earth more than 50 years ago and remain important to science today. If this little amount of Martian dirt makes it back to Earth, we will have a final cost, but in the end, the value may be priceless.
So really, we are doing this for the scientific community in the decades, perhaps even centuries to come.
Crash test dummies take all the hits, so that we don't have to. Today they're jam-packed with technology and can cost more than $1 million each. But despite decades of innovation, one thing has remained the same. The body shapes of the dummies themselves are still based on an average-sized man from the middle of last century. We went inside the factory of one of the top manufacturers to see how they're assembling the most advanced and diverse generation of dummies ever, and to find out why they are so expensive. Humanetics is the largest manufacturer of crash test dummies in the world, based fittingly just outside America's Motor City, Detroit. But ATDs, as they are known, are a rare breed.
People think that there's hundreds of thousands or millions of crash test dummies in the world. In fact, there really isn't. The entire world market probably sells about 300 crash test dummies in any 1 year.
The most advanced Thor design takes up to 5 months to complete. That's because they can include more than 30,000 parts.
It may look like a simple mannequin, but inside the dummy is a lot of engineering and a lot of time and a lot of work.
A complex combination of metals, rubber, foam, vinyl and plastics make up each dummy. And then inside comes an intricate network of sensors and electronics, which feed thousands of bits of data back to car builders about the kinds of force experienced in a crash. Here a worker pours the vinyl mixture into a face mould before putting it into an oven. And the finished product has got to be perfect. Each dummy needs to survive countless impacts while continuing to relay reliable data. Since the 1960s, car safety improvements, designed in part from data provided by crash test dummies, have saved an estimated 600,000 lives in the US.
So it has to be reliable not only for 1 or 2 crashes, but for tens of thousands of crashes over a lifespan that could be 30+ years.
After moulding, each one is trimmed and finished by hand. Underneath the skin, a skeleton provides strength and durability. But unlike human bones, these ones don't break so easily.
Most of the bone structures are made out of steel and it has to be machined. We use numerically controlled machining to make sure they're precisely manufactured.
So inside here he's actually machining what is a hybrid 390 fifth pelvis. We have a print where we have to meet all the tight tolerances. He's machining out the hip sockets where the femurs are going to go.
Skulls, ribs and pelvises are all modelled after their human counterparts. Older models are crude compared to the latest high-tech generation. This Thor dummy even has a pelvis with movable parts.
The Thor pelvis is much more anatomically correct. It allows for more load cells and sensors to be installed on the dummy so that we can record more accurate information.
An array of sensors is used to detect which body parts would have been damaged or broken in a crash and which would have just been left with bumps and bruises.
Every injury that we are able to calculate is because we have literally sensors in every body part that's likely to have an injury. So it's very complex.
The sensors are built and calibrated in their own special lab. The newest dummies contain hundreds of them. When a dummy crashes, the forces come from different directions at different strengths. Sensors can measure compression, torque, impact, displacement and acceleration. Older dummies had cables running into them that sent information to an outside computer.
The weight of the cabling would bias the test in itself. So we developed a data acquisition system. This is really like the black box that goes inside the crash test dummy. But what that does is captures the data in microseconds from the crash, and then that can be downloaded separately.
It's no wonder that a dummy comes with such a hefty price tag.
And if you look at our most advanced crash test dummies with hundreds of sensors and 30,000 parts, hand-built to the most biofidelic standards in the world, they can be as much as $1 million.
Yet the majority of crash tests are still carried out with less sophisticated dummies.
The vehicle is underway.
And in spite of the fact that more women than men in the US hold driver's licenses, ratings agencies continue to use dummies based on a male body shape to compile their star ratings for car manufacturers.
For front crashes, we use a hybrid 3 dummy that represents a mid-sized male. For our side crashes, we use what's called a SID2S dummy, represents a smaller female occupant or an adolescent.
Women and adolescents are represented by smaller versions of the male body shape. Even the male dummies used in tests are behind the times. They're modelled on the height and weight of a man in the US from the 1980s. While height hasn't changed, waistlines have. The average man has put on 20 pounds since then, while the standard dummy has not. Humanetics and other dummy manufacturers began designing more representative dummies more than a decade ago.
The abdomen is slightly more biofidelic than the 50th has historically been.
The Thor generation of models include both a male version, the Thor 50th, and a female version, the Thor 5th.
The difference here is it's not a scaled down male. This is truly a female crash test dummy. And if you look at the Thor 5th, there are many new sensors that have been added to specifically address the injuries and concerns that we're seeing in the field associated with female drivers.
Better reflecting real body shapes and sizes means a wider variety of dummies and greater production costs, but the net result is better data and safer vehicles.
You can actually provide additional information back to the designers of the car companies, the designers of the airbag, the seatbelt, and the other restraint suppliers, and they can use that information to build even safer cars.
However, the cars that we'll see years from now might not ever be tested with crash test dummies at all.
The future holds potentially many changes for our industry. One of the things that might change is that we will be conducting less physical testing with real dummies and real vehicles, and more testing in the virtual world to represent a wider range of speeds, impact angles, a wider range of occupants, male, female, different sizes.
For now though, crash test dummies are still painstakingly pieced together by hand, and they're our best chance of surviving a crash, even if the cars they ride in all end up the same way.
Hong Kong is the most expensive city in the world to find a place to live. But while many of the apartments sit here empty as investments rather than homes, Ao Chit struggles to afford his 30-square-foot box. That's a fourth the size of a parking space.
全世界邊有香港咧咁個環境嘅自由？
The average rent in the city is nearly twice that of London. And sales prices seem to have no limit. A penthouse in this building set the record for the most expensive apartment in Asia per square foot when it sold in February. So, what's the impact on the population? And why is Hong Kong so expensive? Ao Chit pays $360 a month to share an apartment with 18 other people.
我哋嗰啲埃民咧，賤民啊！
This is an upgrade. His old apartment was so small he couldn't stand up.
瞓咗幾年咧，啲腳已經麻痹，而家繼續瞓落去，呢隻腳唔行得㗎。
More than 200,000 people live in these subdivided apartments known as coffin homes.
你就算養隻狗啊，養隻貓啊，個籠啊，都仲大過個床位。
These coffin homes are controversial, but the government struggles to stop prices from rising. That's partly because only a small fraction of Hong Kong's land is developed.
Can you guess how much land we have used for our built-up area?
Less than 1/4 of Hong Kong's land is built out, and only 3.7% is zoned for high-density urban living.
You can argue that it's more like an artificial shortage.
It's all rooted in Hong Kong's colonial past. It was designed to be a low-tax, business-friendly hub, and that model continues today. Until 1947, only expatriates were allowed to live on the hills overlooking Hong Kong. But now it's home to billionaires and business moguls. The government owns the vast majority of land in the city and sells long-term leases for private use through auctions. The sales from those auctions continue to set records. In February, the 1.25 acres of land with these two buildings sold for $935 million.
Unfortunately, in our city, housing has been seen as a commodity, and people buy it up, and try to use it as an investment tool.
For multimillionaires in Hong Kong, 78% of their assets are in property alone. It highlights a problem for cities around the world as real estate has become a store for wealth. The average space per person in Hong Kong is less than half of what it is in New York City. Yet Hong Kongers pay almost 4 times as much for property as New Yorkers.
Housing prices have been so high that it's really beyond the affordable threshold of many families.
Here's what $1.9 million can get you in Hong Kong.
Okay, please come on in. With a sliding door so you can shut it if you like for the privacy. This kitchen is really like functional. A walk-in wardrobe. This is the bathroom with a standing shower. I would say is quite efficiently done.
This apartment may not seem like much, but each square foot is worth over $4,000. Granted, it does have an amazing patio. Purchase prices have stabilized recently due to new policies, political unrest, and the global pandemic. Before that, properties more than tripled in value in just 12 years. On average, a Hong Konger would need to save their full salary for 20 years in order to buy a home. At these prices, renting is the only option for many. Yanis Hui's rent is $640 per month for 120 square feet. It's the most private space she's ever had.
攤開嚟做運動嘅時候，我都要搬走晒所有嘢，然之後先拎張瑜伽墊出嚟。
She's part of what's known as the sandwich class. She makes too much money for public housing, but can't afford to buy.
即係我哋自己香港人嚟㗎嘛，但係香港人係買唔起香港嘅樓。
Some in Hong Kong want to develop unused industrial areas in the new territories known as brownfields. But the government went a different way and proposed developing a series of artificial islands built from reclaimed land called Lantau Tomorrow Vision.
It's not a good solution. It's not a sustainable solution.
The project has drawn criticism from environmental groups, and almost half of Hong Kongers object to the development. While the government is building up the brownfield sites, only 27 acres would be used for public housing.
The solution should be a properly, strategically, ecologically planned new territories and not another reclamation.
But for many residents in Hong Kong, improvements can be measured in just centimeters.
Thank you. 起碼個人可以喺間床左轉右轉攬嚟攬去都得。如果咩日企喺度個床前嗰度企喺度，咁而家咪算好彩。
What if the solution to skyrocketing car prices is to build Jeep knockoffs by hand? A tiny Tunisian car company called Wally's Car is giving it a shot. That's because buying a car is unaffordable in this North African country. Even used cars like Volkswagens and Toyotas sell for twice their US market value. So how did cars get so expensive in Tunisia? Back in 2006, a pair of Tunisian brothers opened the country's only homegrown car manufacturer. This is Wally's Car. Its body is fiberglass instead of metal, and the tiny engine maxes out at 86 miles per hour. Corvettes and other cars used to have fiberglass bodies. The material is cheap, but it has low safety ratings and requires labor by hand.
Today, to find a car which is 100% made by humans and not made by machines at $13,000 US, it's impossible to find.
The price goes up as buyers customize the colors, wheels, and interior.
People come buy a Wallis because they are looking for something that they cannot find somewhere else.
Wally's cars are assembled in Tunisia, but the engine is imported from France and costs about $7,100.
So when we started, we produced 20 cars the first year, and then the second year we produced 80 cars, and then you went step by step.
Wally's Car may be cheap in many places, but it's unaffordable for most in the country since the basic model costs the average Tunisian almost 3 years of salary. That's like if the most basic Ford model started at more than $100,000 in the US. Taxes are a major part of the cost. First, there are import taxes that are among the highest in the world. Then there are consumption taxes with wildly ranging figures that can easily double the cost of the car. Consumption taxes are based on the age of the car, the size of the engine, and what kind of fuel the car uses. Last but not least, there is a 19% value-added tax.
So it means that for most of the car, the price is for more than 50% linked to the taxation level.
So a used Ford Fiesta that costs $3,000 in the US sells for around $7,500 in Tunisia, the difference accounted for in tax and the cost of shipping.
It's crazy how taxation are in Tunisia. The government found this solution to make money. And who is paying for it is the Tunisian people who cannot afford any car now. The cars are too expensive.
Noura and her husband, Craze, have a $5,800 budget to buy a used car.
اللي في مخي أنا الكرهبة اللي نحبها نحب كرهبة صغيرة ما نحبش شكل كبار نحب بولو سيت هكا بولو 6 206 حاجة باهية هكا نحبها نظيفة.
They tested, inspected, and circled around the used car market. Turns out they can't afford one.
موين دو ترونسبور هذيك حاجة ضرورية كيف التلفزة كيف الفريجيدير كيف يلزمها موجودة في الدار على الأقل.
If they were shopping in America, this would be well within their budget. And if there was an efficient public transportation system, car ownership wouldn't be such an issue. But that's not the case. Here in Tunis, buses are unreliable and taxis charge about $1 a mile. Many have no choice but to save and pay more for even the most basic cars. With the demand high, this small country of 12 million people imports a staggering 400,000 cars a year. Only 50,000 of those imports are new cars. The rest are used cars. A new Toyota Corolla sedan starts at $32,000. In the US, the same car starts at $20,000.
هو موضوع هذا موضوع السيارات وقدرة التونسي ذو الدخل المتوسط لاقتناء سيارة مشكل كبير في تونس. لأنه تقريبا أصبح شبه مستحيل للتونسي أنه يشتري سيارة نظرا لغلاء الأسعار.
In recent years, inflation triggered by major economic and political upheavals pushed the cost of imported goods further out of reach. First, it was hit by the 2008 financial crisis. In 2010, weeks of anti-government protests ended with the ousting of longtime President Ben Ali. That marked the beginning of the Arab Spring that spread across much of the Arab world, including Libya, Egypt, Syria, and beyond. If that didn't stop people from visiting, a series of terrorist attacks against tourists did. 21 people were killed in an attack on the Bardo National Museum in 2015. The economic collapse that followed affected rental car companies so badly, many closed. In the last decade, the dinar lost 50% of its value.
هذا أثر تأثيرا مباشرا على سعر السيارات القديمة.
Average income in Tunisia is around $400 a month, and that puts a car out of reach.
The market is really used car business oriented, and the new cars registration is still very, very low, considering the potential of the market.
And it doesn't help when prices change drastically from year to year.
يقول لك كهرباء من عام 2001 و2002 كيفاش باش تفوت 20,000 دينار و 22,000 دينار.
Wally's car doesn't have the capacity to affect the market yet. In nearly 15 years, they've sold 2,200 cars. But there are big dreams of more.
Our wish is to see more Arabic and more African cars around the world.
Buying a survival bunker used to be just something for doomsdayers and survivalists. But this factory in Texas can't keep up with demand because of the pandemic.
People want these like yesterday. They want them so bad, they'll pay up to get them right now.
The most basic habitable bunkers start at $50,000, not including installation. But if you want to include a movie theater, pool, and rock climbing wall, you can spend as much as $4.5 million. So why do people spend this kind of cash on something they might never use? And why are bunkers so expensive? Meet Ron Hubbard, not the founder of Scientology. Just Ron, the founder of Atlas Survival Shelters.
So how do you get prepared? Well, you get your food and water, but once you have all that, you're gonna need a bunker, and that's when I come into play.
He sells bunkers out of his 10-acre factory in Sulphur Springs, Texas.
First and foremost, we want to make sure that the bunkers are airtight because, God forbid, any kind of airborne plague or smoke, chemical warfare, biological warfare, whatever.
Ron says he builds about 24 bunkers a year that are the size of homes, as well as hundreds of smaller storm shelters. He says there's a real demand for an underground escape, pandemic and politics aside.
Conservative or liberal, you just got to be concerned for the safety of your family in case this country ever ends up into any kind of revolution, civil war, or if we go into some kind of world war.
The craze for bunkers is not exactly new.
A new housing development near Denver, Colorado shows the nation's first model homes with built-in fallout shelters. The room is
Thousands of Americans built their own nuclear fallout shelters at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. They were made out of steel to protect against radiation. Larry Hall converted a Cold War nuclear missile silo in central Kansas into a 15-story inverted skyscraper. The government decommissioned the silo, and Larry bought it for $300,000 in 2008.
Whether it was Kim Jong-un before this, or Iran with the previous threats, or when Barack Obama was elected as president, or when Donald Trump was elected as president, I mean, people have a variety of fears.
The Survival Condo Project has 12 apartments, some costing up to $4.5 million each. So far, he's sold all but 2 of the condos.
We have residential level 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Then there's a library and classroom, a theater and lounge, exercise and spa. We also have a sauna, complete with different color mood lighting.
After all, if you're going to spend a serious amount of time trying to survive underground, and if you can afford it, you may as well thrive. In recent years, personalized disaster prep has grown into a multi-million-dollar business. At least 13.2 million Americans say they have plans and provisions in place to survive a month or more without power, running water, or transportation. Prepping can simply mean storing a number of items to help cope during a blackout, or having a storm shelter to survive tornadoes and hurricane-force winds. Since the start of 2021, storm shelter sales are up 30%. That's on top of a 35% increase the previous year.
Possibly part of what has driven that increase in sales is that 2020 was such a traumatic year for all of us. So putting a storm shelter in place for their family was something they could control. They could actually impact and have some control over the safety of their family.
But bunkers are in a different league. Ron sells bunkers with a variety of add-ons like escape tunnels and hidden doors.
So this typically will have a secret passage leading to a secret hatch going down to a secret room. This isn't our grandfather's bomb shelter. They have all the bells and whistles that you would have in a house. I mean, if you can have it in a house, you can have it in the bunker.
This model costs about $500,000 and fits 3 private bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, dining room, living room, and a game room. Ron says he has over a year's worth of back orders, even though prices for the materials to build the bunkers have gone up between 15 and 20% since last November.
The cost of wood has tripled, the cost of steel's tripled, the cost of gas has doubled. Everything's gone through the roof.
Some people decide to build their own shelters. About 60 miles outside of Dallas, a doctor in his 40s built his own 1,200 square foot bunker. He asked to remain anonymous about his labor of love.
I look at this as kind of like life insurance and disability insurance. It's something that you have if you can afford it.
So far, he's spent around $100,000 on the bunker that sits underneath his home and has yet to actually use.
I don't advertise it. I don't mind when I have family or friends over. I'll give them a tour, show it, but publicly I don't want everyone to know about it.
But what makes a bunker so costly?
The pretty things like the stainless steel appliances and the nicer furniture and the higher ceilings are all really relatively low cost. The things that are the cost drivers are the life support systems. Those are tremendously expensive.
Bunkers are made of steel and concrete. It took the doctor about a year and $22,000 worth of materials to plan and engineer his bunker. He paid an excavation company $12,200 to dig a hole 80 feet long and 50 feet wide and about 16 feet below ground. Then he built the bunker quickly because he was afraid rain would ruin the excavation work. He poured a concrete foundation, walls, and filled in the dirt around and over it. He paid more than $20,000 for concrete, $12,000 for styrofoam, and $2,000 for this single door. He said he'll invest another $30,000 to build out a kitchen and other rooms. Of course, he's already stocked the bunker with $30,000 worth of guns and ammunition. Pandemic fears are likely to stay strong for years after it's over, and the truth is, there's always something to fear.
Nobody knows what the future has, so the attitude is it's better to have it, not need it, than to need it, not have it.
These works of art exist in the digital world, and now they're worth millions of dollars. It's part of an explosion in the market for NFTs, digital tokens that prove ownership of things like digital art that you can't even touch. The center of this virtual gold rush is Mike Winkleman, better known as Beeple.
Like, I never thought I could sell my work like this.
Then he heard about NFTs.
Kind of late September, early October, people kept hitting me up being like, oh, you gotta look at this NFT thing.
2 months later, he netted $3.5 million selling art backed by NFTs.
Definitely just like mind-boggling.
In March, Christie's, a 225-year-old auction house that previously only sold physical art,
Previous in the collections of 3 kings of England at 90 million.
Auctioned an entirely digital Beeple for millions of dollars.
Is it a bubble? I think there is a very good chance. There could be a bubble.
So why are NFTs and digital art getting so expensive so quickly? The speculation in this market is so wild that when a $95,000 Banksy was burned and then resold, it raised a staggering $400,000 as an NFT.
we sort of value things. It's like if everybody wants it, well then it has value. I mean, what makes a Louis Vuitton purse have value? It's just brown like leather purse.
To understand who pays, it's important to understand NFTs.
So it's sort of like saying, do you think a web page is valuable? Well, I don't know, it could be.
NFT stands for non-fungible token, essentially a digital signature backed by blockchain technology that proves ownership of something. Unlike Bitcoin, which are all identical by design, NFTs are unique. To some degree, what NFTs offer for sale is the idea of scarcity. It's possible to buy a token that represents art in the physical world, but NFTs also back digital assets like an image or even a tweet. The current bid on Jack Dorsey's first tweet is $2.5 million. This cat meme recently sold for $600,000.
Last week, Logan Paul made over $5,081,490 selling digital trading cards of himself known as NFTs.
For Beeple, his daily dedication to his craft helped drive his popularity as he posted art he created from his home in Charleston, South Carolina.
So May 1st, 2007, I started doing a sketch a day, every single day, start to finish.
And year after year, Beeple gave them away and built an audience online.
Sharing my stuff and sort of putting it out there, I think, actually makes the stuff more valuable because it makes it more popular.
His rise to broader fame as an artist happened seemingly overnight. Back in the olden days of 2020, Beeple's NFT-backed Crossroads sold for $66,666.
I was like, oh my God, I sold a piece for $66,000. It was just like insane.
In December, Beeple sold $3.5 million worth of art in one day. On February 26th, Crossroads resold on the secondary NFT market for $6.6 million, of which Beeple got 10%.
And so now, fast forward 4 months, and it's like 6.6 million. It's just like, yeah, it's a lot. It's a thing, I don't know.
Then in March, Christie's sells the 5,000 image montage by Beeple for nearly $70 million. That makes Beeple the third most expensive living artist in the world.
It's like, okay, now the next thing happening, now the next thing happening, the next thing happening. And it's just like, you know, now Today Show calling, okay.
His work can also cross into topics that can be offensive or provocative. So is Beeple trolling us with his art and with this idea of selling something you can get for free off his Instagram?
So I'm like, okay, well that's, you know, not a totally invalid argument. What can I do to sort of like nullify that argument?
Back in December, Beeple provided a physical product along with the NFT for his digital art.
This you can't get on Instagram. This is like, you know, a physical thing that you can, if you're buying the NFT, you get this. So it really kind of instantly sort of like changes it. And it's like, you don't even really need to understand the NFT part. Like, you're buying this.
But for Christie's, being all digital is what made Beeple's artwork all the more unique and valuable.
It's really a radical gesture to offer for sale something without any objecthood. And we might as well lean into that.
Beeple's day job is as a graphic designer with clients like Louis Vuitton, Nike, and Apple.
So I don't really like the term artist because it sounds very pretentious and douchey. Like, I would never be like, I'm an artist.
Still, he's regularly compared to Banksy and Warhol, artists who undermine the notion of owning art, and also to that Italian artist who mocked the fine art market by taping a banana to the wall.
This banana duct taped to a wall. It's Maurizio Catalan's latest work of art. It's called The Comedian.
I think if you looked at a lot of fine art, you would probably say the same thing, or most people would say the same thing. They'd be like, who paid for this?
This is Ryoma Ito, co-founder of Maker's Place, an online marketplace that sells NFTs. He teamed up with Christie's for the sale of Beeple's collage.
The big catalyst was the Christie's auction. That announcement brought in a lot of visibility in so many different channels.
To build anticipation for the Christie's auction, Ryoma teamed up with Beeple to sell some of his artworks for $1 each. It crashed the Maker's Place site.
At our peak, we had about 450,000 requests coming through at a second. So
day trader Keith Llewellyn was one of the lucky ones, buying the NFT for just $1.
So I learned about NFTs last week just before I posted this video on my TikTok. Then I followed the world's biggest NFT artist and noticed he was having an NFT drop where his work was going for only $1.
Key ended up with one of Beeple's artworks and was offered $50,000 for it the same day, but didn't take the offer.
I expect it to expand like exponentially by the end of this year.
Instead of art collectors, many of the buyers at the moment are like Key, speculators and investors in this gold rush. Just like with cryptocurrencies, environmental and climate concerns are real. NFT transactions use significant, growing amounts of electricity. In a single month, one NFT marketplace went from 200 transactions a day to 5,000.
And I honestly think that the sort of digital art community is gonna take this much more seriously, addressing these issues than sort of the broader blockchain community.
The question is, if this mania will keep going or come crashing down.
Barbary sheep are native to North Africa, but this one was hunted and shot in Texas. Just stuffing and mounting the animal costs anywhere from $700 to $5,000.
You can go crazy on those things, but it's going to be a lot of money.
Still, that's only a fraction of what hunters spend on tracking down and killing the animals. And we're not just talking about Barbary sheep. You can spend thousands on the chance to take a shot at animals like zebra, Cape buffalo, and even giraffe. But what makes the world of exotic game hunting in Texas so expensive?
I have been doing taxidermy for about 10 years. My father actually started this shop in the same location in 1975, so it has been around for a while.
Kristen's business has doubled since she took over from her father 6 years ago. She now takes in around 650 animals a year. Since the 1950s, Texas ranchers have built an entire industry out of breeding and hunting exotic animals and selling their meat. Today, that industry brings in around $2 billion in annual revenue in the state and employs more than 14,000 people.
I call this the taxidermy Bible.
A relatively simple head mount for a Barbary sheep like this starts at $725.
I mean, it could be endless, but now if you want, you know, it to go on the wall and you want it to be open mouth and you want a bird, then that's just extra on what you want.
It's a long process. Tanners cure and prepare an animal's skin over a 5-month period. After that, the taxidermy process begins.
I'm not a hunter, I'm not a fisherman, I'm just in it for the art.
It takes about a day to mount the animal.
I take a knife and I just cut along the seam all the way until the ears are, I can turn them completely inside out.
Casey prepares the skin and puts it on a mold in the shape of the animal. And sometimes it doesn't quite fit.
Let's stretch the side of the cape too.
Can you hold right here? I don't want to cut your stitch because that would ruin everything. Okay.
I'm gonna cut this out and we'll tuck that.
Then Casey fits the horns to the mount.
Pretty good size.
After setting the horns, they place the eyes using plaster, then form the facial expression, and sew up the back. At least 5,000 ranches in Texas raise exotic animals. Brian Gilroy breeds over 60 different species of non-native wildlife on his 1,750-acre ranch south of San Antonio.
Most of the wildlife is originally from Africa, but we do have some Asian species as well as a few European species.
He sells them on to other breeders, hunting ranches, or investors.
Cape buffalo went from 90,000 to 300,000 in a matter of 1.5 to 2 years.
The more exotic, the higher the price tag. Zebra, gemsbok, and Dharma gazelle sell for thousands too.
There is an emotional connection that we have to wildlife, but it is very much financial as well. This is a real investment.
His main expenses come in personnel, animal care, and fencing that can cost up to $30,000 per mile. Still, Brian says he's expecting to bring in $25 million of sales in 2021. Hunting is big business too. Exotics like kudu can cost $19,500 to track and kill on a private ranch. Kangaroos go for around $7,000. Chris Leland has been guiding hunts for Barbary sheep for about 10 years. He charges $3,500 per person for a 3-day guided hunt on his 25,000-acre ranch, where his guests can track free roaming animals.
This is not high fence hunting. This is either low fence or no fence, free range, fair chase hunting. The sheep's got just as good a chance as anybody else does. And we don't call it killing, we call it hunting.
Even though clients pay thousands to hunt, they can still go home empty-handed.
They're going to spend probably $5 grand on their travel, their lodging, their food, their hunt, and then depending on the degree of taxidermy, up to another $1,200, $1,400.
At Kristin's taxidermy shop, she adds the finishing touches to the Barbary sheep. One of the final steps is to paint and airbrush in the details.
It gets stressful because it's art.
Hunters can wait up to a year for their trophy. It's not to everyone's taste, but for them it's time and money well spent.
Demand for oxygen in Peru has exceeded supply. With hospitals running out during the country's punishing second COVID wave, families have to buy their own. A single cylinder can cost up to $400 on the black market. The lack of oxygen helps make Peru the country with the world's highest death rate per capita from COVID-19. Thousands have died in Lima in recent months. And this is where many of them end up, the vast Virgen de Lourdes Cemetery. That's Lenin Froilan. He spent more than $6,000 on oxygen to try to help his mother before she died from COVID.
Medicinas y oxígeno. Pero de nada sirvió.
How did this happen, and why is medical oxygen so expensive? We met Lenin standing in line to get oxygen for his mother one day before she died. He had been waiting since 4 a.m.
Estamos obligados a estar así. ¿Por qué? Porque tenemos que hacer cola por gas.
This plant on the southern outskirts of the capital offers free medical oxygen to those with a prescription, but the wait is anywhere from 12 to 15 hours. People eat and sleep in line until it's their turn. They're only allowed to fill one 10 cubic meter cylinder every 48 hours. That won't do for Lenin's family. A patient with severe COVID-19 needs up to 3 cylinders a day. His 3 sisters have COVID too, so he's had to spend thousands of dollars on additional cylinders wherever he can find them. Lenin sells furniture and earns about $650 a month, so he's relied on the last of his savings.
Pero ya no hay plata. Lo que acá es, se han aprovechado, el sector salud se ha aprovechado.
So why don't Peru's hospitals have oxygen? In most of North America and Europe, companies mass-produce medical oxygen and deliver it in liquid form by tanker. Liquid oxygen is more dense and kept in large vessels at very low temperatures. Hospitals then pipe it directly to the beds of patients. The pandemic has caused oxygen shortages in places like Brazil, Mexico, and India as hospitals struggle to keep up with demand. Prices skyrocketed in countries that lack health infrastructure and relied on oxygen cylinders, which are more expensive. Bulk oxygen piped into hospitals costs as little as 1/10 as much as oxygen in cylinders. It's like paying for bottled water instead of getting it from the tap. At peak times in April and May, Peru fell short of nearly 40,000 cylinders of oxygen every day. At one point, neighboring Chile sent liquid oxygen to help, but it did not fill the gap. Overwhelmed hospitals in Lima ran out of beds in February. Patients lined up outside to get oxygen, but with thousands of severe cases a day, hospitals ran out.
Llegó un momento en el cual ya los balones que nos daba el hospital no nos daban abasto, entonces los familiares tenían que comprar.
Families took it upon themselves to look after their loved ones and began shopping for cylinders. Homes started to look like hospitals with medical equipment lying around.
Pero si la llevaban, decía que tenía que estar, si la llevaban, que le iban a tener en un pasadizo, y con, a esperar a una cama.
¿Y cuánto aguantan esos balones?
¿Cuánto dura?
Sí.
Pues durará hasta, depende de la saturación, porque cada que baja la saturación hay que volver a subir la dosis.
Marisol got sick caring for her parents at home, but she didn't stop helping them.
Entonces yo tenía que lavarles la ropa a ellos, a mi papá y mi mamá, atenderlos, darles de comer en la boca. O sea, yo me he ocupado de mi papá, mi hermana se ocupa de mi mamá. Y así hemos estado pasándola.
So how do people in Peru buy oxygen? Companies couldn't produce enough oxygen as the second wave hit in February, so black market operators like this man stepped in to meet demand.
Como te digo, al comienzo estuvo los balones 5.200 soles, 6.000. Tengo gente que ha comprado 5 o 6 balones, son 25.000, 36.000 soles, que me parece mucha plata.
Now he exchanges empty cylinders for full ones and charges up to $400 for a full cylinder.
Lo que he estado haciendo ahora es comprarlo en ciudades donde están menos afectadas y donde hay más o donde hay plantas de oxígeno que no están abasteciendo tanto y me dan un precio barato.
This small factory in Lima has also raised prices, just not as high as the black market. A 10 cubic meter cylinder that used to cost $16 to fill is now $70.
Claro, lógico, es frustrante no poder ayudar a veces. Nosotros, Oxiromero, en la primera ola pudimos apoyar algo. En la segunda ola, como te comenté, las fábricas que nos daban oxígeno nos dijeron, Oxiromero, no te podemos abastecer porque estamos colapsados.
Oxy Romero began making its own oxygen using a technique known as pressure swing absorption to extract oxygen from the air. But that only allows them to fill about 20 tanks at a time.
Esta es la parte más vital e importante de la planta porque acá es donde se separa el aire en lo que es nitrógeno y oxígeno. Este es como el pulmón, digamos.
Oxy Romero would need to overhaul the plant to produce more oxygen, and that's out of reach during the pandemic.
Acá podemos ver la pureza del oxígeno. Al 95% se está trabajando en la actualidad.
At the Virgen de Lourdes Cemetery, Lenin laid his mother to rest alongside hundreds of other victims of Peru's second wave.
Yo ahorita sí ya me siento tranquilo haber hecho la sepultura de mi madre con la ayuda de mis familiares, pobremente, humilde, así como ha visto usted, tierritas.
Lenin says it's hard to be hopeful with his sisters still fighting the virus.
Ya uno vive, creo que en shock. Ya está temblando que ya mañana te toca. Ya yo soy un siguiente paciente y pasado mañana ya me están enterrando.